Yeah,
Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large.
This is Ruth McLeod, the Southern Atheist.
And this week we are coming at you with yet another fast-paced, awesome, incredible, how do we get these kind of guests interview.
And it's mostly because I just don't want to talk directly to Chris anymore.
Pretty much. We're just kind of sick of talking at each other and, creating all this controversy with all these like horrible things we talk about with Fox News and, the far right and how horrible all those people are, even though they're totally not.
Totally.
So anyway, this week we have a guest, and actually he's actually a very special guest and very cool because he was somebody that I met very early on in my own recovery from Scientology back when I lived in Minnesota. And he actually came to a book club meeting. I had gotten involved with some skeptics and some atheists and other black-hearted souls out there, and I was at a book club meeting, and we were just talking about books and whatnot, of course, as book club people are wont to do, and we picked up this book called Deliverance at Hand, and that book was written by James Zimmerman, and our book club president had actually arranged for James to come to the book club because he lived there in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, and so I got to meet him. And actually, the rest of the book club meeting was almost 90% of him and me comparing notes between his former group, which was the Jehovah's Witnesses, and my former group, which was, of course, Scientology. So we had a grand old time at that book club meeting, and since then, James has gone on, and we'll talk about, details of what he's been doing professionally, but he's actually written some articles for Pathos, and his book is published through Free Thought House, and it's called Deliverance at Hand, and we'll be talking about that book as well. So, James, welcome to the show.
thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to have you.
Yeah.
So I thought we might start with, we're going to be talking about the Jehovah's Witnesses. First off, just talk a little bit about yourself and your experience with them and where you're coming from on this.
Well, my parents and grandparents are all Jehovah's Witnesses, and so I was, raised in the religion from the time I was born, as was my wife, too. Her family were witnesses before she was born, her parents at least, And so after we got married, we obviously continued in it. I was very zealous as a witness. I was for a while, I was what they called a regular pioneer, which is someone who's promised to donate 1,000 hours of their time every year to doing the door-to-door ministry.
Wow.
Yeah, that lasted, I did that for 5 years.
Wow.
When I was a junior and a senior in high school and, into early adulthood there. So, but then obviously, the demands of real life make it so that that's not feasible for too long. But I was still, it was really touted as a good thing to do. And in a congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, there's maybe 100 members, and maybe 10 of them are what's called pioneers. And most of them can only do it for a year or two, as you could imagine, because it somewhat limits your financial ability, which is why a lot of kids do it when they're in their last year of high school and right after they graduate,
Oh, of course. So that's why
yeah.
you tend to see these young men coming around, knocking on the doors and whatnot, is because they're the ones who can afford to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as their name implies, all Jehovah's Witnesses are required to go in the door-to-door work. Yeah. But they're supposed to do it regularly, which I guess translates to like at least once a week. So if you could imagine just doing it every Saturday morning, at the end of the month, you've done it, 8 to 16 hours maybe of that,
Mm-hmm.
So to be a pioneer promising to do 1,000 hours a year, that comes out more to around 84 hours a month, 83 hours a month, whatever it was. So that's quite a bit more,
That is a lot more.
Yeah.
That is serious devotion to the cause.
Yeah, it was. And it was witnesses teach that the end is coming any day and that God's going to destroy all the wicked people, which is almost equivalent to all the non-witnesses. And then, he'll bring a new paradise for the witnesses to live in. So they teach that that's going to happen any day now. So when I started as a regular pioneer when I was 16 years old, I thought for sure I was positioning myself good to be, well approved of by God, because I thought the end is coming any day now, certainly in the next 2 or 3 years, and I'll be doing this really good work, So,
of course.
How do you plan your future if you always think stuff is just about to end?
Yeah, there's minimal planning. It's kind of weird because there's definitely some cognitive dissonance, which probably is the least surprising thing I'll say this whole time. But yeah, see, they don't promote college, because why plan for 2, 4, 6 years of that and spend all that money and time when the end is coming anyway, and even if the end is like 6 years away, okay, so you have time to get your undergraduate degree. That's great. But why bother with that when you're only going to be able to do that future job for a year or two? Instead, you should be devoting yourself to God. So, and most of them don't plan for retirement either, because that's even farther off.
Right.
I mean, if you're 15 years old, the chance that you're going to have an opportunity to go to college is approaching, right? But the chance that you're going to retire, that's so far away.
Right, yeah.
Right.
For that,
So what happens when someone reaches retirement age and they go, wow, I feel like I've been gypped?
Yeah, that I don't know. I'm not sure what happens with them, because they're very, as you can imagine, a lot of them don't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
They're low income, they're low education because of that. So there's just not a lot of preparing. In fact, there were some witnesses that were very sure that the end was going to come in 1975. So they even threw caution to the wind even more. I mean, it's one thing to not plan for retirement. It's another thing to just rack up a ton of credit card debt or to stop paying your mortgage because you're sure the end is coming that soon. So a lot of them really screwed themselves over because of that.
Wow.
But there's always this thought that the end is right around the corner. That's what they always say, right around the corner, right around the corner. And in fact, in my book, I mentioned that one time I was in a car with a few other witnesses, and we were driving to a neighborhood where we were going to go knock on doors. And one of the men in the car, he said, "How long do you guys think it'll be till God brings the end?" Of course, there's the scripture that says no man knows the day or the hour. So obviously, he's saying, obviously, we know that we're probably wrong and we don't know. But what do you guys all think? And there was me and him, and then 3 or 4 other ladies in the car, and everybody said 6 months, 9 months. One woman even said, "Oh, maybe this wicked world could keep going for a year." But then I stopped and I thought about it, and I said, I'm going to go with 5 years. And maybe that's just my personality, and I wanted to say something different. But they were all just so surprised, like
Wow.
jaw-droppingly surprised, like, "Whoa, how can you say that?" And that's not even a good attitude, because you're going to lose your passion, your zeal, if you think the end is that far away.
Oh, of course.
Wow.
Of course.
It's the mid-90s, so
Yeah, you should probably call him up and be like, ha ha,
Ha
what's
ha,
that?
yeah, exactly.
I even when shortly after I left the religion, one of my uncles, most people just drop you. They like shun you right away. But a few people will try to win you back in. Hopefully they think they're doing a good thing. And one of those was my dad's youngest brother, my uncle. And so we emailed back and forth for a couple of weeks as I was leaving. And one thing he said is that, the end is so close. I can't imagine this world going on for more than 2 or 3 more years, which of course is what people had said in the 90s. And now he's telling me that in 2006 or whenever that was. But I kept that email, and I like even put it on my, in a saved folder, and I look at it every once in a while. I'm like, wow, it's now been 7 years. Now it's been 8 years. Now it's been 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, their mentality never changes. Like I said, people thought the end was coming in 1975. And then when I suggested in 1995 that it was still 5 years off, that was unbelievable. And then in 2005, when my uncle suggests it's only 3 years away, that seemed like an outside guess, so.
That's fascinating. It's really interesting, the Doomsday cults and the studies that get done on those members, because they're fascinating psychological and sociological studies that really speak to, the cognitive dissonance and the whole phenomenon of that. In fact, wasn't some of the original studies on that done on? I know definitely some of the groundbreaking work on this subject was done on the subject of Doomsday cult members.
Yeah,
if I remember right.
I
don't know if Jehovah's
about
Witnesses
an original study, but I've definitely read a whole lot about Doomsday.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, because it, from a psychological point of view, you'd have to be absolutely fascinated with somebody who is saying, we have this date when the end is coming, right? There's been these cults, these UFO cults and Doomsday cults that do this, and then the date comes and goes.
Yeah.
And they're all okay with that, and you're like, well, wait a second. How are you possibly reconciling this? And then they just come up with another date.
Yeah.
And push it forward again. So it's fascinating what the human mind will do with that.
The witnesses, I mean, even they weren't called Jehovah's Witnesses until the early 1930s, but the group that eventually grew out from them has had a long time to become pretty professional at talking about the end coming, because at first in the late 19th century they would say it's going to come in 1889, it's going to come in 1899, it's going to come in 1900, and then it's a complicated story, but they finally settled on the year 1914. They said that's the year that Jesus is going to come to earth. He's going to get rid of all the badness. He's going to select one true religion and establish his kingdom here on earth. Well, 1914 came and went and nothing happened. But in a way, something did happen, because that's when World War I started, right? So they said, oh, look, it's just, we meant that 1914 was the start of the end. Look at how terrible the world's got. There's this great war going on. But then by 1918, when that was winding down, they're like, oh, okay, so maybe Jesus is just saying he's going to come within the generation of 1914. They based that on scripture in Matthew 24, where it says that generation will by no means pass away. So they said, all you people who saw 1914 will still be alive to see the end come. And they pushed it out to 1925 and then 1935. And then they said, well, it could be, a generation could be 40, 50 years. And that's one reason why people thought it would come in 1975, because by then it was, what would that have been, 60 or 60 years since the end. And then they realized we have to distance ourselves even more and just say, well, a generation just means if you were even alive in 1914, you'll still be alive when the end comes, which could push it out 100 years, right? Because someone born in 100 years old. And then even recently, because now even that's straining credulity, about 5 years ago, they changed
as if all those earlier dates hadn't.
Yeah. But so they realized, oh, wow, 1914 is getting to be so far into the past now that we have to figure out something to do. So they've come out with a new teaching about 5 years ago that said, okay, the word generation as it's used in the Bible, it means the people overlap with the other people. So basically that means people born in 1914, they will overlap with the people who are alive when the end comes. So if you think about that, that would mean
themselves more time.
That 1914 generation, because obviously in our lifetime, people from 1914 were still alive, especially when we were young. And, we could live several more decades, so. So they've pushed it out.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying they really pushed it out now. In fact, Carl Sagan even commented on that in one of his books, just saying that the witnesses are just so amazing that when it didn't happen, they said, oh, it did happen. You guys just didn't see it. Christ came invisibly, and you just got the word generation wrong, So it's kind of funny.
It is, like I said, it's an amazing testament to the creativity and imagination of the human mind that we can do that.
Yeah.
Especially when James even said it. There is literally a passage in the Bible that says no man knows when it's happening.
Yeah.
That different religions, witnesses, all sorts have tried to pinpoint when it's going to happen. And who was that preacher a couple years ago, Couch or something, where all of his followers sold all of their stuff.
Oh yeah, and they had the billboards.
They had the billboards
that was a very famous one.
I know, it's huge, and it's people have gone up on mountaintops and they're just waiting and all of this. And it's like, if you really truly believe, especially in this, in a book, your holy book, the Bible, whatever, and it says in there that you can't know, why are we trying to figure this out?
Yeah.
Pretty silly stuff.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask, we can, the belief system, of course, is fascinating, like all of these groups are. But let's take a look at, James, you and I spoke briefly about the idea of a cult, right? And specifically a destructive cult, which is a term I use. Pick that up from Janja Lalich and Steve Hassan and which goes back to Margaret Singer and Robert Lifton's work. And so I try to, talk about these groups in terms of the harm that they do, which is why we use the term destructive cult. But what's your take on this? You wrote a book about this, you've looked at this, and what's your definition of this whole thing and why the JWs are not necessarily the same as a mainstream religion?
Yeah, I definitely would categorize them as a cult. And toward the end of my book, I struggle with that question a little bit because my wife was first I mean, between us, she was for the first one to say that they were a cult. And for a while I resisted. And even today, I think, what difference does it make? Because either way, they're wrong, and I'm not joining them, whether we call them religion or sect or cult or corporation or whatever, So in that way, it's not relevant to me. But I do agree that they fall under the cult umbrella. And a couple things about them is that first, there's no way to affect change from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very cult-like. Another one is that there's a very us versus them mentality, extreme, even to where if you leave the religion, you're completely shunned immediately, even by your close family.
Right.
And everyone who does leave, well, I guess I can't speak for all of them, but the vast majority of people who do leave view them as a cult, which is another sign that they're a cult.
Right.
In fact, the list that you referenced there, how do you say her last name again? Lalich?
Yes, Janja Lalich's work.
Yeah, I think the only one that you could argue that they don't fit is the charismatic leader. And they don't fit that anymore. They used to under
Right.
Judge Rutherford. We don't have to get into that history, but he was their president from the 19-teens up until the mid 1940s. But after that, the power kind of fell to a governing body, more of a board of directors of like anywhere from 10 to 16 men. And I think most witnesses today, if you said, can you name the men who are on the governing body, most of them would be hard pressed to name even two or three of them. So there's not that charismatic living figurehead. Instead, it's just the Watchtower as an organization by itself. So that's probably the one that I think you could legitimately argue they don't fit. But of course, Lalich doesn't say that they have to fit all exactly. She just says they have to fit the vast majority, or whatever her phrasing is.
No, that's exactly right.
You know what I'm saying, though,
yes,
right?
definitely. And most especially, the shunning aspect of it and the us versus them mentality seems to be very, very strong in the JWs. I interviewed Lloyd Evans, who had been a witness up until just a few years ago, and he's been very much an advocate against the JWs. Has a YouTube channel, I guess, sort of similar to how I've been an advocate against Scientology, and we talked about the shunning and whatnot in there. I'll put a link to that interview on the podcast. But what has been your experience with shunning and your views on that, and how does that work in the JWs?
Before we get into my own personal experience, I gave a presentation about the witnesses in Spokane, Washington last spring, and a woman asked afterward, during the Q&A, she said, well, why do they hold to the shunning? Why don't they give that up? Because it seems so upsetting to people. It seems like such a big turnoff. It makes people bitter. It even makes the faithful members suffer. So why do they hold on to that? And my off-the-cuff answer pretty much was that's the Watchtower Society. The Watchtower Society, by the way, is the Jehovah's Witnesses governing organization. That's pretty much their only power, because like when my wife Jennifer and I were thinking of leaving, it's not like we thought, oh, we're so depressed that we'll never get to go door to door again, because that was a complete drag, And it's not like my wife thought, oh, I'm going to be so upset to not be treated as a second-class citizen because of my gender, And it's not like I thought, oh, I'm going to be so sad that I can't dress in a suit 3 times a week and go to their 3 meetings every week that they have, But when you stop and think, oh, everyone that I've ever known and loved, my best friends, my parents, grandparents, uncles and aunts, and all these people I've known since childhood, they're all just going to immediately stop talking to me no matter what, and there's nothing I can say to change their mind. That gives you a moment to pause and think, ooh, maybe I don't want to leave, because I don't want to give up on that. We're social beings,
Very, very much so. It is absolutely a control mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
and that goes
how do you
back
tell
to
a mother to stop talking to her child? That's something that I just don't get. I don't have children, but if someone told me to stop talking to my sisters, I'd be like, yeah, F you, I'm out.
Yeah, I agree. That's really upsetting. And, this is in my book, but the reason why we left when we did and not any sooner is because we were new parents, and there was a lot of things we couldn't imagine, like these teachings that we don't really agree with. How do we teach them to our son? Because in the witnesses, you have to agree with absolutely everything.
Right.
So there are some things we didn't agree with. So could I teach them to my son, or do I tell my son that I don't agree with them? Then he'll out me as an apostate,
Right,
But even more serious than the teachings is, what if he leaves the religion when he grows up? Would we shun him? That seems so impossible to do, especially when you're looking down at a 1-year-old baby, which is, the epitome of innocence,
Right.
So that's what really made us think. But the Watchtower Society tries to provide little outs for people. Like they'll say, well, obviously, if someone leaves the religion but they still live in your house, you have to have some contact with them, but don't talk about religious things with them. I mean, like, let's say I'm a 19-year-old kid, or I guess that's an adult. Let's say I'm a 19-year-old and I still live with mom and dad. All right, well, they can't not talk to me at all. I mean, we have to talk about laundry and bills and vacuuming and whatever else it takes to run a house, right? But
Right.
don't talk to them about religion anymore,
Right.
And they'll also say that you can contact your family members if there's a dire need, like, if grandma dies and now that we have to go to a hearing of her will, or we have to do something with her estate or something, then you can contact them because of legal reasons, or because, grandma wanted them to have such and such or whatever. So
Grandma's
yeah,
breaking the
it's a
rules.
sticky situation.
It very much so. How do they treat minors who rail against the religious? If they're in a family of 5, let's say, and one of the children is like, not only do I not want to do this, I actually think this is completely ridiculous, and I disagree with the entire thing. Does that shunning thing come into play there?
Yeah, it still would, but so here's one good thing about them. They don't do infant baptism. They don't consider you an actual member of the religion until you've been baptized, and they think you need to make that decision yourself. So if
Yeah.
there's
My
let's
religion
say
is the same thing.
if you have a 7, 8-year-old kid and they say, I think this religion's totally stupid, I hate it, and I want nothing to do with it. Well, guess what? They never really were a witness, so they can't really leave it.
Okay, right. Now that makes more sense.
Yeah,
like
and
it,
also
I'm
at that
sorry.
age, mom and dad can kind of force them to go to church and stuff, I
Right.
mean, depending on your parenting techniques. But so, like, I was baptized at age 12. My wife was baptized when she was a 15-year-old. So at that age, they figure, okay, you're mature enough. It's funny that they think you're mature enough to make this most important decision of your life, but no one would argue that you're mature enough to, like, get married.
Well, exactly. It's 12 years
But
old. I'm like, did you really understand what was going on?
no, I didn't, which I didn't even think about till I was in my 20s. But
Well, then there's a lot
but
of
so from that
pressure.
point on, I could be disfellowshipped, or I could leave the religion, because now I had actually entered into it. I was now, the day I was baptized, I was then technically a Jehovah's Witness. Before, I had only really been in association with them. It's kind of splitting hairs there. But
Right.
so if I had decided, let's say when I was 13, that I wanted nothing else to do with it, obviously my parents were still duty bound. The Watchtower Society would say it was their God-given duty to continue to provide for me materially, and to shelter me, and to feed me, and to make sure I got to school. But they could also gently guide me into coming back toward the religion, but they would have to desist from religious debates, and I wouldn't be associating with the other members of the congregation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you would lose friends and things like that that you might have through the congregation because they're not going to associate with you anymore.
Yeah, and it's more serious than you might think, because witnesses think that all non-witnesses are not good people to be friends with. So if I'm like when I was a 13-year-old, and if I was contemplating leaving the religion, it's not like I thought, well, I won't have the friends at the church anymore, but I do have these buddies in junior high school with me. No, they were not my buddies. They were worldly non-witnesses that I kept at arm's length. I mean, I was friendly to them at school, but I never like hung out at their house, or went to sleepovers or birthday parties with them, or went to camp with them. So I didn't have any other friends except for the Jehovah's Witnesses. And for me, this wasn't the case with my wife, but for me, even all my cousins were witnesses too, so I wouldn't even really have them to associate with anymore.
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
So it really is this very black and white, us versus them sort of society.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. After we left the religion, about a month later, a couple guys at work were going to see a movie, and they said, you want to go see a movie tonight? And I was like, wow, I could do that. I could do that.
Yep. Well, yeah.
Totally.
Actually could have a life. Interesting,
Yeah.
because they go door to door to these people. And so, but of course, their view, I suppose, and tell me if I'm right, is more of, okay, I am, the good person clothed in white and bathing in light here of the Lord, and I'm going to go knock on the door of this, this non-witness sinner person and save them. So it's not, so it's of course okay to interact with them and whatnot because we're going to be saving them.
Right, in that situation it is. And they're taught to be good people, I mean, they're not supposed to go out of their ways to be jerks to their classmates or their coworkers or the people that they live next door to. So they try to be good people,
Right.
in that way. And they think that they're doing a good service by going door to door and telling their neighbors about the Watchtower's beliefs.
Right. Yeah, of course, because any person who is not a witness is potentially a witness, and therefore
right.
You want to.
And they even say that they say that witnesses should try to give a good witness, which is just kind of their way of saying a good impression. So they really go out of their way to put their best foot forward because they think these people are potentially witnesses. Anyone could be, In fact, they even say you should really go out of your way to give a good impression of the religion to your classmates and to your coworkers because these people are not at home. So if there's witnesses going door to door at their house right now, they're not getting them at home because they're at work or at school, right? So you have an opportunity now. So.
Exactly. I wonder if the overt friendliness of the Mormons and whatnot is also sort of along the same lines.
I think it is because at least, with both the Mormons and the witnesses, it's part of their own salvation too. So I know I've heard like morning DJs and comedians and people say it's just so crazy that witnesses keep going door to door and no one listens to them. They have to go out for millions of hours before they get one new recruit, some ridiculous number like that. But when I was a Jehovah's Witness, in a way, I didn't care if no one listened to me because I was doing that as part of my worship to God. So I thought I'm saving my own life by trying to save yours, if that makes sense.
Right.
So
that was a big thing in the religion that I grew up in as well. It was, be a good Christian so that people can see how good it is to be a Christian kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. The Watchtower Society sometimes compares it to if your neighbor's house is on fire. You run over there, you bang on the door, you maybe bust down the window, you run in there and you see them sitting on the couch. You maybe even stick your hands under their armpits to try and pick them up and move them, Yep. But if they're going to hold on to the couch, I mean, you might be upset about that the next day, but really your conscience shouldn't bother you. You did everything you could. You were the hero there, So it's the same thing with the witnesses. You're duty bound to go out and tell them and give them this literature and share these scriptures and bring the news. But if they're like, no, thank you, I have my own religion, or I'm not interested, right. Or get away, it's upsetting because you want grandma or your neighbor or this guy that you share a cube with at work. They're good people. You want them to come into the religion, but if they're not going to, what can you do?
Right. Well, at least it's not a, jihadist sort of situation where, you're going to...
I'm going to force you.
Yeah, at sword point.
Yeah, you're right. That's another plus. I'll add that to my list of good.
You got it. We got to look at all the pros here,
Yeah.
Well, it's a case where they figure that God will do the dirty work. Essentially, God will murder all the people who don't listen to him one day. So in the meantime, we'll live. So in that way, they're very peaceful. In fact, they're conscientious objectors to the military, so they're very peaceable people. So.
Right. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit briefly here about the history of this thing because I think I'm certainly interested in it. I don't have a full rundown on this. We talked a bit about the Doomsday aspect of it in the early 1900s, but where did these guys actually come from?
So you can kind of pick your starting date.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, but I think the furthest back I would want to go would be about the 1860s or 70s. There were two men, Nelson Barber and Charles Russell. They both came out of New York, which was referred to as the burned over district back then because so many missionaries had taught about fire and brimstone in that area that people colloquially called the area the burned over district.
Wow.
So those two men were really turned on by the message that they heard. And of course, there was talk of the end coming then. And of course, dates came and went in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s. And especially Charles Russell thought he liked their message that they were trying to find out what the Bible really taught, not tainted by Catholicism or Lutheranism. But he thought they weren't quite right. So he made his own Bible study groups, at first just small groups in homes with him and Nelson Barber, where they just would read scriptures and try to figure out exactly what the Bible says, like try to strip away any bias or any preconceptions they're bringing with them from their religious upbringings. And in time, it became really popular, so they started publishing a newsletter. And then, of course, in time, Barber and Russell disagreed on something, so they split ways. And Russell was the one who had the lion's share of the money, so he was able to keep his magazine, his newsletter printing. He was able to keep that going as the Watchtower magazine.
Oh, okay.
And he made several predictions about the end coming, And so he really thought, he again, there we go again, where he didn't really make any plans for the future because he thought, well, there's no, I don't need to think about what's going to happen after I die because the end will be here before I die. Well, he died. Oh, geez, I don't remember how old he was, but he wasn't elderly. He was maybe in his 50s or 60s. So not a young man, but not an old man. But so he died kind of unexpectedly in 1916, and then there was kind of a vacuum among the Watchtower Society of who would have control of his books and of his literature. His will actually specifically said that nothing new should ever be published except for his books and the Bible itself and the back issues of the Watchtower magazine. But
Really?
one of the men in the organization, a couple of the men disagreed with that, and they were able to strong arm people out. And the eventual victor was Joseph Rutherford, who was not a very nice person.
He's been compared to the David Miscavige of Scientology, the guy who took over for L. Ron Hubbard.
That's right. Yep, it's very similar. And so he took over as the Watchtower Society's president. In the 1930s, he gave the organization its name, Jehovah's Witnesses. In fact, decades before that, they said, we're not a religion. We're just a group of people trying to study the Bible who all subscribe to the same magazine, But Rutherford said, no, we have to be a religion to distinguish us from the other Christian religions. We're going to give ourselves a name like the other religions. We're going to have an organization. It's going to be a top-down thing. So he really streamlined it and made it more like a corporation.
All right. So he's the one who organized it up as more than a literature reading sort of group.
Yep, and he also, of course, came out with his own books, too, which went against Russell's will. And, Russell basically said, if you want to use my money after I die, then you shouldn't do that. But he did it anyway. And it's kind of interesting. You can see a progression in how Rutherford's thoughts changed from Russell's over the decades after Russell died.
Sure.
He kept changing it more to his liking, a little bit more authoritarian, if you will, more us versus them. So, and that's just continued ever since Rutherford even died.
Interesting. And again, I've found the comparative between that and Scientology more than a little interesting and kind of disturbing, really.
I bet, yeah. Same formula.
Well, very much the same formula. And Miscavige, like Rutherford, has made it more authoritarian, if that was even possible. But and of course it is possible. And he's made it much more rigid and much less... I don't know. I guess you could say, he sort of took all the fun out of it. Mm-hmm. When you talk to Scientologists from the 60s and 70s, you get a very, very different picture of how it is now.
Yeah. And the clearest thing is, if we go back to the shunning, someone wrote into the Watchtower Society back in, I think, 1912 and asked Charles Russell, the president, and said, hey, we have this study group, we meet together, and a couple of the people believe this, and a couple of people believe that. What should we do with the people who don't believe what the majority thinks? Should we kick them out? And he wrote back and said, oh, no, that's freedom of conscience. If that's in good faith, if they believe that, you guys can agree to disagree. So there's the complete opposite of what the witnesses have now, because now you have to agree with everything, or you'll be removed from the religion, even small things. So.
Interesting.
I would be more comfortable, I think, with a group of people who got together and talked about the same book, kind of like a book club.
Oh yeah, that's
and
exactly
just
what
bring
it's
up
like.
their different concepts or thoughts and ideas about it. That makes you think more about it. So I don't understand why someone would want to go, oh, you disagree with me, be gone. That seems anti-intelligence to me.
Well,
like most religions, they have things that you're supposed to do and not do. A lot of those are really obvious. They don't want, witnesses are supposed to only have sex with the person that they're married to. They're not supposed to take illegal drugs. They're not supposed to be drunk. They're not supposed to break the law. A lot of things like that are more obvious, but they're also supposed to be faithful in what is little too. And I can give you, I know one example is that there's a woman that I know, she's since left the religion, but back when she was a witness, she made the decision one day that at the end of the month, when witnesses are supposed to report how much time they went door to door, she just thought, I'm not going to do that anymore because that bothers my conscience. I think it's just between me and God how much I do,
Huh.
So that's a real tiny thing compared to like those other things I just listed off, right? And it's not like she was even saying, I'm not going to go door to door or I'm going to badmouth reporting time. She just thought, for my own sake, I'm not going to do it,
Right.
But she was nervous. I mean, she only kept that up for a couple months because once the elders said, hey, how come you haven't turned in any time lately? We don't know. Have you not been going door to door? And she said, no, I have. I just haven't reported it. And they're like, oh, no, you can't. Why not? So even with little things, it will spiral out of control because they'll say, why aren't you doing this? Then you say, I disagree. Then they point out why you should agree. And if you continue to disagree, they'll just kick you out even for the littlest thing.
Golly.
Right. Makes sense. I guess arguably then we could say Rutherford was really the first actual destructive cult leader of this group.
Yeah, that's why I say you can kind of pick the date. I mean, they
sort of turning it
first
into this.
called themselves Jehovah's Witnesses in 1932. Rutherford assumed the presidency in 1918. So, there's a few different dates. You can go back to Russell's early days in the 1870s too. So
Sure.
But yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense too.
In terms of bringing in a rigid thought and authoritarian structure and really bringing down the us versus them and the rules and regulations and thou shalt and thou shalt not and the shunning and whatnot.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, what sort of, how are the witnesses in terms of, economics, education, dress? Like what sort of regulations rule the day these days with these guys?
So there's kind of two sets of rules, I guess, going on. There's the hard and fast rules. Like one of them is, don't sleep with someone if you're not married to them, right? So that's just a hard and fast rule. But there's a lot of suggestions that if you don't do them, you're not in trouble, but you're really looked down upon. And for example, one of them is that they discourage higher education. They'll say like maybe technical school is okay because you can get that over with pretty quick if you just need a quick job as like a plumber or electrician or a truck driver, but they discourage going to universities. Now, if you do that, you're not going to get in any trouble really, but since you're supposed to be serving God / the religion wholeheartedly, they'll wonder they're not going to give you any privileges or any responsibilities in the religion because they'll see that you're not doing that, and then you're kind of viewed as a lesser witness. So I know that of major religions in the United States, they average the lowest amount of education. I believe 8% of Jehovah's Witnesses have any sort of college degree.
Wow.
That even includes associate's degrees. And keep in mind, and that holds true because when I was a teenager and I look back on the congregation I was in Minnesota, again, there was about 100 people in the congregation. I can definitely remember 3 of them had a college degree, and 2 of them acquired those degrees before they became witnesses, Wow. So it's not very common for them to get degrees.
Yeah, and are there any sort of regulations in terms of appearance or dress or conduct?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to talk about that too. Well, they say to always be modest. So there's a wide latitude with how you could take that. But for the religious activities, the men are supposed to always wear a suit with a tie and even a suit jacket. And the women are always supposed to wear a skirt or a dress for religious activities. Yeah, you're not supposed to be, not supposed to have tattoos. Men are not supposed to have any sort of body piercings. Women are only supposed to, women can get away with their earlobes. And you're also supposed to be clean shaven, which is kind of a funny thing. Mustaches were somehow deemed okay, but for some reason, long sideburns, goatees, and certainly full beards were considered a no-no. And their rationale with that is that it would look, it would get out of control, which never made sense to me because they didn't have any stipulation against the hair on a person's head. And obviously I could let my scalp hair get out of control too. But so I don't know why they couldn't just say men can have beards, just make sure it doesn't look like you're some wild hippie who just came out of the forest,
Well, yeah, I guess the hipsters need not apply.
Yeah, that's kind of what it was. And they'd be really weird about it. I remember that I went to, my wife and I went to a Jehovah's Witness wedding, and the woman who was the photographer there was a Jehovah's Witness, and she was wearing some sort of slacks or, some sort of pants, right? Which made sense because she's climbing up and down on chairs. She's, getting down on her knees to take all these photos, to get all these good shots of the bride and groom and stuff, right? And I remember a couple people saying, when is she going to put on her dress, And she never put on a dress because she's like, well, I'm more here as an employee of the bride and groom. I'm not really here to worship today. We're not really having church services,
But she's still getting crap for it. Holy crap!
Yeah, she was still getting, people whispering about it. And a thing that happened to me is that my wife and I went down to Florida to visit with some of my relatives, and in the few days before we left, we didn't go to a couple of the Jehovah's Witnesses meetings because we were busy, and then we fly down there, and of course we didn't go to the meetings while we were down there because we were on vacation, right? So I probably 10 days went by and I didn't shave because I hated shaving anyway, so I'm certainly not going to do it. And I remember that the day before we were going to go to my uncle's wedding, another uncle of mine came into my dad's house and he saw that I had a beard and he said, "Are you going to shave that thing?" And I said, "Oh yeah, of course I am. Later today before the wedding." He said, "Good, because we won't let you in without that." And then he left, and I said to my dad, I said, that's a terrible thing. Even, I was a witness at the time, but I said, that's a terrible thing for him to say, because you're allowed into the building no matter what,
Right.
Especially because, as I said before, they want to give a good impression. So if you have, facial tattoos, 10 piercings on your face and a beard down to your navel, they'll say, "Sure, come on in," because they want you to come in and see what they're all about. I mean, if you want to join, you're going to have to shave and take out those piercings,
Right.
But in the meantime, you're welcome to walk in the door. So
you were already a member, so you didn't.
Yeah,
there
so
was no
that's
slack cut for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. What any other kinds of regular lifestyle customs or activities that witnesses are required to do or follow?
Well, they do not celebrate any holidays.
I was about to ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that includes birthdays.
Really? No birthdays?
Yeah. They're also not supposed to have blood transfusions, either donate blood or take in blood.
Oh, that's the witnesses.
So those are probably
right.
two of the biggest social things that they're known for,
Okay. Huh.
And when I say no holidays, I mean both the, all of them. That includes like the patriotic ones like Thanksgiving and Memorial Day and 4th of July, and also the ones that are more overtly religious like Easter and Christmas.
None of that.
No, and then even the ones that are neither patriotic nor religious, such as Mother's Day or Groundhog's Day, they won't do those just because, well, those are just more things that the world does to keep us, away from God's favors. I don't even know what their rationale was. It was so hard when I was a kid in elementary school and junior high and high school to give people a rational reason why I couldn't celebrate Thanksgiving. They'd be like, "Well, there's no school tomorrow, right?" I'd be like, "Yeah." "You're going to be home with your family, right?" "Yeah." "You're going to eat dinner, right?" "Yeah." "Well, how are you not celebrating Thanksgiving? Are you going to be thankful for the food or not? Yeah.
Right. If we happen to slip some stuffing in there,
Yeah.
Hope nobody notices. So
yeah.
So well, that's interesting in terms of the attitude about it. So now, Jehovah's Witnesses do or do not recognize Christ as a Messiah.
Yeah, they do recognize him as a Messiah. They're different than a lot of Christian religions because they don't think that Jesus is God. They're not Trinitarians.
Uh-huh.
So they wouldn't say that God came down as flesh in the first century like a lot of Christian religions do. They view Jesus as an inferior to God. That there was God Almighty, who they call Jehovah, who was in existence before time began, and he created Jesus as his son. So that's their stand on that.
Okay, so they follow the virgin birth idea.
Oh yeah, they do believe that Mary was a real person, and that God sent one of his angels down and said, "Hey, you're pregnant." So.
Yeah, boom. There you go. Surprise. Mm-hmm. But they don't look at him as an alter ego of God. They look at him as a man.
No, yeah. Well, they view him as an angel, the most powerful angel, but they believe that in whatever the year 1 or 2 BC, he was put into Mary as an embryo, and that he lived here as a man for 33 something years, and then he died and went back to heaven. So
all right, so therefore celebrating his life or birthday or anything is just another way that the man is trying to suppress us and put us down.
Yeah, they say here's the reason not to celebrate Christmas is because Jesus being born wasn't important. He came here to die for us. And that's also why they don't celebrate Easter, because the fact that he resurrected was not really important either. It was just that he died for our sins. So the one thing that they do, quote unquote, celebrate is Christ's death, which is what most Christian religions would refer to as Good Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Witnesses call it the memorial. And by celebrating it, I mean they just have an additional meeting that day, and they pass bread and wine around, but they do not eat or drink it. So.
What?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, wait.
Thank you for this glass of wine. It will just sit here.
Yeah, that's another weird thing too. So they believe that most witnesses don't think they're ever going to go to heaven. They believe, is it Revelation chapter 14 says that 144,000 people will go to heaven.
Yeah.
And they'll serve as kings and priests alongside Jesus. And Witnesses, their teaching is that they're kings and priests over the earth. So the earth was put here as a place for humans to reside. They believe Adam and Eve were real people, and they say, hey, if they had never sinned, they'd still be alive today. So they never would have died. So obviously they never would have gone to heaven. So if you ask a random witness on the street, hey, when you die, are you going to heaven? Almost none of them will say that they're going to heaven. I never believed I was going to heaven. Neither did anyone in my family or most of the witnesses that I knew. So when they celebrate Jesus' death and they give a talk about it, they sing a song about it, then they say, all right, just like Jesus did the day before he died, here's a plate of unleavened bread. We're going to pass it around. And you're only supposed to partake of that if you think you're one of the people going to heaven.
All right. And the 144, from what Lloyd was telling me about, are already chosen. That's already, that number of witnesses has already come and gone. So now everybody who's left who becomes a witness are the people who are going to inhabit the earth.
Pretty much, yeah. I wouldn't say that they've all come and gone. So they view like the apostles in the first century and like Paul and Timothy in the Bible. They believe they're among the 144,000. They would certainly think Charles Russell and Joseph Rutherford were among them. But they do think that God's already selected all of them.
Right.
So some of them might still be alive today, you know.
Oh, okay. All right.
And every once in a while, someone in the, you know, this happened 2 or 3 times when I was a witness. Someone in the congregation would just say, hey, guess what? I'm going to heaven. God asked me to go to heaven. So witnesses would rationalize that as, oh, someone else who was going to heaven must have proved unfaithful, must have left the fold. So God had to find a replacement. So.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the bread and wine never got eaten when I went to the memorial. Maybe 2 times ever in my 30 years as a witness, I saw people nibble on the bread or sip from the wine. And then afterwards, they would cork back up the wine and someone would just take it home and drink it that night. You know, the bread was just unleavened, tasteless garbage that we just threw away. So.
Yeah, that stuff's pretty nasty.
It is pretty rank.
So
I would take it afterwards, you know, just because it was an experience. Like, oh, what does it taste like, you know?
Right.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it's way worse than a saltine.
It is.
Yeah.
I feel bad saying that because that implies saltines aren't good and they're just fine.
Well, okay. So now that you have, when did you leave it behind, and what sort of prompted you to do that?
So it was over 9 years ago now. I was in my early 30s. I touched on it a little bit before, but it was mostly because my son was born, and my wife and I really struggled with the religion after he was born, especially because, you know, in the wake of his birth, my wife was having a difficult time, you know, as some women do after that, and so she found it difficult to do everything that she should in the religion. So one thing she was worried about is, oh, if I'm not a good witness, then God's going to kill me at Armageddon, and he's also going to kill my son. If that makes sense.
How do you just go on with life thinking stuff like that?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a real head trip, and that was very depressing / anxiety inducing / setting. And so she would wonder sometimes, like, maybe I should just stop doing it altogether, because then you can just do it so that our son makes it into the paradise earth, or maybe we should just all kill ourselves now because we're not going to make it anyway, and why are we raising our son just so that he gets killed by God in a couple of years, you know? And through I talk about this more in my book, but in the first few years of our marriage, before our son was even born, we had already uncovered some inconsistencies in the religion and with their teachings. And I had even written to the Watchtower Society some questions, and I got unsatisfactory responses. And we saw some unsavory things happen in the churches that we belong to. So those things we were able to kind of push down into the dark recesses of our mind. But then once our son was born, we were like, oh, do we really want him to continue with this? So,
So you witnessed. Sorry for the pun there. You said unsavory aspects. Again, you know, from what I've seen of Lloyd's activism, there's you know, some real abuses that have gone on that have been sort of forgiven amongst the membership. People turn a blind eye to child abuse and things like that. Did you we don't have to get into specifics, but did you witness things like that?
Yeah, the most prevalent thing that I talk about in the book that were grievances that I had in my young adulthood was that some of the elders in the congregation were very abusive of their power. And I would try to chalk that up to, Jehovah will take care of them in due time, and it's not that bad, or they're just a bad apple. But then there was also a case where there was a child molester in the congregation, and he was removed from the congregation. But here's the thing: is he was disfellowshipped, meaning that you have to shun him. But he continued to come to the meetings, which some disfellowship people do because they want to get back in, because they've lost their entire social network and friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
So he continued to show up at the meetings, which I didn't really like, because there were lots of even though I was not a parent at the time, there were lots of children there, and I just thought these parents don't know what he did, because they don't announce it from the platform. If they say. If they say, Bob Smith is no longer Jehovah's Witness, they don't say why. They don't say,
Okay.
they can't for legal reasons, right? They can't say he's no longer a witness because he cheated on his wife. He's no longer a witness because, he robbed a bank last week. They can't say that because there could be legal repercussions. So they just say they're no longer a witness, and then all the witnesses know to shun them. So that's all they could say about this guy, was he's no longer a witness. And I knew because of how it had because through the grapevine I knew, but most witnesses didn't know. So when he was allowed to come back into the religion, that was very upsetting. And I refused to talk to him, even though we were in the same congregation for about a year. And we even... I got a new job that made for a really crappy commute, so I wanted to move anyway so that I didn't have to have such a long commute. But that was just an excuse to leave the congregation and go move to another one,
Okay, on a legal standpoint, just because I kind of deal with this at my job, if somebody was disfellowshipped because they were a sexual predator, that's something they should have let their congregation know. Because if he did do something at the church again, and no one announced that was a possibility, they could be sued.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I believe that you're right, because the witnesses are in litigation in different parts of the world right now, most notably Australia, because of their policy of not saying that all the time. I remember I even was upset about that, and I told my dad, how dare they let him come back into the congregation, and now he can, if he wants, he can get in a car and go door to door with some 10-year-old boys, and the parents will just think, oh, isn't that great that this man's taking care of my, teaching my kids in the ways of God, and who knows what he's going to do with them.
Yeah, exactly. And silence equals complicity when it comes to that sort of thing, and that's what they're getting in a lot of trouble for right now.
My dad said, oh, everybody knows what he did, and they know to keep their kids away. And I said, no, they don't know, because I overhear them gossiping. You'd hear them before and after the meetings talking like, I wonder what he did. Because we always wondered whenever people got kicked out, oh, what did she do?
Right.
And then she's pregnant. You're like, oh, we know what she did. So people would try to
of course, because people are people. Of course they're going to talk.
Yeah. In fact, one friend of mine was removed from the congregation my grandfather went to, and he was an elder there. And I wanted to know what she did, but he wouldn't tell me, of course, because they keep that private. Mm-hmm. But then in telling the story, he mentioned how he had to go into the casino to find her because she wouldn't come to the meetings. So I was like, oh, that's what she did. She got a job at a casino, and witnesses are not allowed to gamble, much less be employed by a gambling establishment. Right. So it's funny. He didn't even want to tell me that, which is, really benign. Oh, okay, great. She's working at a poker table. Like I care, right? So.
Right. All right, fair enough. Any other sorts of, customs or activities or anything else the witnesses get up to that you want to comment on?
I think that maybe this isn't unique to the witnesses, but like a lot of religions, women are definitely in subordination to men.
That's right. You hinted at that earlier. There's so misogyny. Unfair. Yeah.
It is, yeah. And it bothered me especially because, no offense to my dad, but my mom was definitely smarter. she was more studious. She knew the Bible better. She was a better speaker, but because she was a woman, she was not allowed to be more active in the congregation. They're not allowed to do anything really but go door to door. Well, that's not exactly true. They can do one other thing, and that is that at one meeting that the witnesses have a week, they have it's almost like a Toastmasters meeting where members get up and give brief little speeches, and then they get people evaluate those speeches. And women are not even allowed to give those speeches, but what they can do is they can go up on stage and sit at a table, face another woman, and they can talk to each other. Because then that way they're not teaching the congregation, they're just teaching each other. And
really?
I thought that, yeah. So I thought that was really insulting. And actually, when I started dating my wife, she wouldn't do that because she just thought it was so stupid. And I thought, yeah, you're right. That is really
Like you're
insulting.
gonna try to pull a loophole on God? Come on.
I don't, yeah, yeah. And it was really silly in my own family growing up because my mom would write my dad's, my dad was an elder in the congregation. So he gave lots of, more important speeches actually teaching the congregation. And my mom would often write them for him.
Right. Of course.
So then we'd go to the meeting, and then my mom gets up for 5 minutes, every 4 or 5 months, sits across from another woman in the congregation, and they talk about some Bible topic that's been pre-selected for them. And then later in the meeting, my dad would get up and give a 20-minute exhortation about why we should, make sure that we're, I don't know, wholesome people. And my mom wrote that, so it was really an odd juxtaposition. So
wow, where does that specific attitude come from? Is that a Charles Russell thing or a Rutherford thing, or what? Is that just a straight, because there's certainly no shortage of misogyny in the Bible. I mean, is this coming straight from that?
I can't really comment on Russell because I'm not familiar enough with what his own beliefs were. I think just as a person in the 19th century, he probably naturally felt that women were inferior.
Sure.
That was the general zeitgeist in America. But Rutherford was the one who established what the different roles that were going to be in the congregation and what the meetings would be. Would consist of. So I would bet he was the one who at one point said, okay, and we're gonna have one meeting where the members can practice giving speeches so that they get better at going door to door, but we can't let the women do it.
Right. So, and of course the ruling council now are a bunch of old white guys.
Oh yeah, it's yeah, like I said, women are not allowed to do anything but participate in the door-to-door work, so they're definitely not in leadership position.
They're certainly not in any kind of leadership position. And they're a bunch of old guys, too, the leadership. So you're not particularly seeing any sort of, like, new blood coming up there. And they've been compared to, I asked about, how is it that these guys make it to that level? And it was sort of, it's sort of survival of the dumbest.
Yeah, that's a good phrase for it. You definitely have to move up the theocratic ladder, if you will. So it would be hard to be like on the governing body in New York and be under 50 years old, I would think, because you've really had to prove yourself over time,
Mm-hmm. So they're certainly not very progressive thinkers.
No.
All right, tracking on that. Now something kind of interesting about this group, and when you told me this, I had no idea. So Prince is a Jehovah's Witness.
Yes, the musician Prince. Yes, he's a Jehovah's Witness. Yeah,
that's fascinating to me. Has he been for a long time?
Yeah, I would say about 20 years. His big breakthrough and his fame and fortune all came before he was a witness.
Of course, it had to have been, given what he's been singing about.
Just like the men in my congregation who had college degrees that they got before they were a witness, it's almost unthinkable that it would have happened the other way, because especially a musician's lifestyle of having to go from town to town doing gigs, I don't know how they could also be a member of a congregation, and how they could go out door to door with their congregation every week if they're on tour, So I don't know how you would have done it the other way around. So yeah, he got his fame and fortune first, and then somehow decided that the witnesses were his thing.
I just want Prince to come to my door.
Yeah, exactly. Let's do some door to door.
Watchtower. I'd be like, you know what? You come on in, sir.
Yeah. He's a witness I might invite in. Yeah. What? Could you sign my Bible, please?
Yeah. The witnesses kind of, would snicker in private at him because when they would have their larger assembly, he was never in my congregation. He's also from Minnesota here, so he didn't live very far away from me, but he was not in my congregation. But when we'd have the larger assemblies at the civic centers a couple times a year, then I would see him because, of course, his congregation was there like mine. And he, everyone else is in these really mild-mannered, modest, drab suits that they got from Montgomery Ward's and Sears, right? The ring dresses. And then Prince comes in just this, flashy purple with all these guys around him. Probably couldn't care less about the witnesses, but they're getting paid, good money just to stand next to him and be his bodyguard, right? And so he would just show up with this whole entourage. And meanwhile, everyone else there, their median income is, $30,000 a year. And he's walking in, owning more than the rest of the witnesses combined. And it was just really a funny sight to see.
Wow.
Definitely. Very definitely. Are there other celebrities who are Jehovah's Witnesses that we might not know about or lurking around out there?
There's a few. The tennis players, Venus and Serena Williams, they're both Jehovah's Witnesses.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Michael Jackson was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. He pretty much abandoned it once he became a young adult. But some members of his family are still Jehovah's Witnesses. His mother was for her whole life. So
Wow.
I know that Dwight Eisenhower's parents, this is really getting far back, but his parents were witnesses, but they joined the religion when he was in his late teens, so he never took to it, which, as I mentioned, they're conscientious objectors, so his life would have been very different had he never joined the military.
That's true.
So,
Our whole world would be different if he had.
oh, yeah, we would never have heard of him. Yeah, things would be so different, yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. All right. Fair enough. I was just curious about some of that.
You know, I recently learned that my aunt, uncle, and cousins are witnesses. I had no idea.
Well, there's some more celebrities right there.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Ruth's family.
Some of my, and this is like my aunt who will not talk to me anymore. As soon as I became an atheist, like done. No more talking.
So you got shunned just
almost immediately.
Wow.
From that side.
Wow.
Yeah, she sounds like a witness then.
Yeah, that's very witness-like.
Well, I always thought she was Methodist because my father's side of the family grew up Methodist, and I just assumed that's what she was. And literally last month, I found out that my cousins did the whole door knocking thing, all of it. Like they each did, I think, about 2 years, and that was about it.
Wow.
I don't know, but they all about it. I had no idea.
Wow.
Interesting. So now, where can people get this book, Deliverance at Hand, that you have written, and what is this book about? Is this a memoir, or what is that?
Yeah, it's pretty much a memoir. It tells a lot about my life as a Jehovah's Witness, and I cover like the my childhood and teenage years pretty quick, and then I go more into depth about some of the doubts that I had as a witness and how they came up, and the research that I did while still a witness. And then I also go into more detail about what ultimately caused my wife and I to leave and how we agonized over that. And then I spend a couple chapters on the fallout of that, about the people who contacted us or shunned us, when they found out we were leaving, and what they thought of that, and then what I thought of that in turn, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a memoir of me and then me and my wife's lives. The subtitle is The Redemption of a Devout Jehovah's Witness, and it's available. I suppose the best place would be at freethoughthouse.com. That's through the publisher, but it's also on barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com. And I don't know what bookstores in Colorado it's in. I know a few here in Minnesota, but I couldn't name any in Colorado.
Fair enough. All right. Well, good. Well, definitely check that out. And we're going to put links up. James has written a paper about shunning in the Jehovah's Witnesses, and so we'll see about getting that was also put up on Patheos. So,
that was a few months ago. Yeah, did I give you those links already?
No, you're gonna give those to me so I can post those.
I will. Okay, I'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so James, thank you very much for taking the time, coming on board here, and giving us a rundown on this. This is certainly interesting stuff.
Oh, you're welcome. It was nice talking to you, too.
And I hope you're having a good time celebrating all your birthdays and everything.
Absolutely.
I want every candle on it, even though it gets more ridiculous every year.
Perfect. All right, man. Talk to you again soon.
Yes, thanks. Bye, guys.
All right, bye-bye.
Yep, bye.
Well, that was very interesting. So we're going to just wrap up our show now. If any of you out there have any comments, questions, or anything else, also interview subjects or anything else you'd like us to do on this show. We will be, of course, getting back to our usual insane banter. We do have an interview again next week with somebody very unique and interesting. We'll see how that rolls out. But and we have some others lined up for February. But we will also be getting back to our original format of some hot topic items, news, and just ridiculousness. Just Chris and I arguing with one another. Pretty much. Or completely agreeing with one another way too damn much. That too, yeah. So anyway, thanks for coming around, folks. Really appreciate you listening, and we will talk to you again next week. Thanks, guys.